I had never planned to spend the night in Millfield. It was supposed to be just a quick stop, a forgotten, nearly abandoned village in rural America where my late grandfather once lived. My car broke down on the way to a bigger town, and the mechanic nearby said he couldn't get the parts until morning. The sun had just dipped below the horizon when I finally reached the village, dragging my suitcase over rough gravel, guided only by the faint glow of my phone's flashlight. Millfield wasn't on any map. The place felt frozen in time. Crooked wooden fences leaning into the wind, houses with peeling white paint, roofs sagging from decades of rain and snow. The streets were narrow and eerily empty. The only sound was the whisper of tall grass swaying in the breeze. An old woman appeared from behind a gate, her face hidden under a faded scarf. "You're not from around here," she said without greeting me. Her voice was dry, brittle. "No," I replied. "Car trouble. I need a place for the night." Her eyes flicked toward the dark street behind me. "The old lodge is still open, but lock your door, and—" She hesitated, as if unsure whether to say more. "If you hear tapping on the window, don't look." I almost laughed. It sounded like the kind of rural superstition my grandmother used to tell me, but the way her eyes lingered on me, a flicker of fear beneath her wrinkles, sent a chill down my spine. The lodge was a sagging two-story house at the far end of the main road. Its windows were clouded with dust, and a dim yellow light bled from inside. The innkeeper was a stout man, with a limp, his breath smelling faintly of whiskey. He didn't ask questions, just handed me a key to a second-floor room and muttered, "Don't wander outside after dark." Inside, the air smelled of damp wood and stale smoke. My room was small but warm, with a single bed, a desk, and a heavy curtain that swayed faintly, though the window was closed. By the time I settled in, the village was swallowed by blackness. No streetlights, no passing cars, just a pale sliver of moon overhead. I sat at the desk, scrolling through my phone, but the signal kept flickering. Eventually, I turned it off, letting the silence stretch. That was when I heard it. A faint tap, tap, tap on the window. At first I thought it might be branches brushing the glass, but the sound was too regular, too deliberate. 3 taps, then silence. A pause, then 3 more. My mind flashed to the old woman's warning. "If you hear tapping, don't look." I stayed perfectly still, every muscle tight. The curtain swayed again, just slightly, as though something was moving outside, something breathing. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination feeding on village folklore. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something stood on the other side of that glass, waiting. Minutes passed before the sound stopped. I exhaled slowly, got into bed, and pulled the blanket over my head like a child. Sometime past midnight, a scream shattered the silence. It wasn't a normal scream. It was thin and warbling, as though the voice was being dragged across metal. I bolted upright, heart pounding. From the window came a faint flicker of movement, quick, jerking shadows darting between houses. Against my better judgment, I lifted the curtain just an inch. The street below was wrong. The moonlight seemed too sharp, the shadows too deep, and in the middle of the road, facing my window, was a figure. Tall, impossibly thin, its head tilted to one side. Even from a distance, I could see its eyes, pale, reflective, like an animal's caught in headlights. It didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood there, head angled unnaturally, watching. I dropped the curtain and stepped back, my pulse roaring in my ears. Downstairs, the floorboards creaked, too heavy to be the innkeeper's shuffle. Something was moving through the lodge. I opened my door and peered into the hallway. It was empty, dimly lit by a single bulb swaying in its socket. But from the stairwell came a low, wet sound. Not footsteps, not breathing, more like something being dragged. I backed into my room and locked the door. The dragging grew louder, closer. Then came the tap. 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 Not on the window this time, but on my door. Slow. Testing. A whisper followed. Too soft to make out the words, but it was inside my head more than in my ears. My vision swam, and for a moment I felt my hand drifting toward the doorknob, as though some part of me wanted to open it. The key in my pocket, the one the innkeeper had given me, felt suddenly hot, burning my palm. I snapped back, stumbling away from the door. The whisper cut off. Silence. Then, nothing. I must have dozed off at some point because I woke to the sound of someone sobbing outside. I checked the clock, 3:17 a.m. Against all reason, I went to the window. In the street below, the same tall figure stood under the moonlight. But now it wasn't alone. 4, maybe 5 others had emerged from the shadows, each twisted in a slightly different way, arms too long, necks bent at impossible angles, faces hidden in shadow. They moved together in slow, jerking steps, like puppets pulled by invisible strings. Then one of them looked up, straight at me. Its face. I can barely describe it. Skin stretched tight over bone, lips split and raw, eyes that seemed to burn with a dim, colorless fire, and a smile, wide, too wide, splitting its face in silence. The others turned their heads toward me, one by one. I stumbled back, knocking over the chair. My breathing turned ragged. Downstairs, I heard the lodge's front door creak open. The dragging began again. I remember grabbing my jacket and suitcase, bolting into the hallway, my footsteps thundering down the stairs. The air in the lodge had changed, colder, heavier, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. The front door was ajar, moonlight spilling onto the warped floorboards. Outside, the street was empty again. Too empty. I ran. Through narrow lanes, past crooked houses whose windows all seemed to watch me. Shadows moved just at the edge of my vision, following. Every turn I took, the same distant tap, tap, tap echoed behind me, never speeding up, never slowing down. Finally, I reached the edge of the village, or what should have been the edge. But the road stretched endlessly ahead, lined with the same houses I had already passed. Millfield was folding in on itself, trapping me in its endless night. Somewhere behind me, the whispers began again. I don't remember how I got out. Maybe I didn't. I woke at dawn lying in a ditch beside the highway, my suitcase gone, my clothes damp with morning dew. A passing driver picked me up, and when I told him I'd spent the night in Millfield, he frowned. There hasn't been a village there in 50 years, he said. Burned down. Nobody lives there now. But last night, there were people, things, watching me from the dark. I still hear the tapping sometimes, on quiet nights. Always 3 taps, then silence. And I know, if I ever look, I'll see them standing there, smiling up at me from the shadows. The village of Cedar Hollow was small enough to be forgotten by most maps and too isolated to appear on GPS. Tucked deep between thick pines and craggy hills, it was a place where time seemed to crawl, where the past whispered beneath the rustling leaves. I arrived at dusk, the sky streaked with bruised purples and fiery reds. My car had sputtered to a stop miles from the nearest town, and my phone's battery was fading fast. The only sign of life was a narrow dirt road leading to Cedar Hollow. With no other choice, I decided to push my luck and head toward the village, hoping to find shelter for the night. The air grew colder as I approached, and the dense forest thinned, revealing a handful of wooden houses. Their weathered boards were grey and cracked, windows dark and empty like watching eyes. No smoke curled from chimneys, no lights flickered inside. It was as if the village was holding its breath, waiting. I stepped onto the creaking wooden porch of the only building with a faint glow, a small general store, long past closing hours, but with a lantern burning dimly by the doorway. Inside, the air was thick with dust and old wood. Shelves sagged beneath forgotten goods, and a bell tinkled faintly as I pushed the door. There was no one inside, just the faint sound of something scraping in the back room. "Hello?" I called out, voice trembling. No answer. I moved deeper into the store, eyes adjusting to the gloom. At the far end, a rusted trapdoor sat slightly ajar, with that scraping noise coming from below. Against my better judgment, I lifted the heavy hatch. A gust of cold, damp air rose from the darkness. I pulled out my phone and aimed the flashlight down the steps. The beam revealed a narrow cellar, walls dripping with moisture, and a faint trail of footprints, fresh footprints, leading into the black. I debated following, but a sudden sound above, a sharp knock at the front window, made me jump. Heart pounding, I grabbed the lantern from the counter and stepped outside. The village was eerily silent, but I spotted a figure standing across the street. A man, or something like it, with 2 long arms and a head bent at an unnatural angle. He held a lantern of his own, but it flickered erratically, casting strange shadows that danced around him. He didn't move toward me. Instead, he raised his lantern high and began to walk slowly down the street, each step dragging and hollow. Curious and afraid, I followed, careful to stay in the shadows. The path led me past boarded-up houses, past abandoned cars half swallowed by vines, and finally to a cracked well in the village square. The man stopped there, lowering his lantern until only its faint glow illuminated the mossy stones. Suddenly, he turned to face me, and I saw his eyes, empty sockets, black as night. I wanted to scream but couldn't find my voice. The lantern's light flickered violently, and the air grew heavy with a choking silence. I stumbled back, and the world seemed to warp. The trees twisted, the sky darkened, and the village shifted into something unrecognizable, a ghostly echo of itself. I realized then that Cedar Hollow was a trap, a place where the dead walked with lanterns, searching for the living to replace their light. I ran, but every street curved back on itself. Every house seemed to close in. The flickering lanterns multiplied, their bearers whispering in voices like dry leaves, calling my name. By the time dawn cracked the sky, I was on the outskirts again, panting and soaked in cold sweat. The village behind me was silent once more, and the only proof of that night was the faint scent of smoke and the lingering glow of a dying lantern in my mind. I never returned, but sometimes at night, when the wind shifts just right, I swear I hear the tap-tap-tap of a lantern being raised somewhere in the dark. The last time I visited Pine Creek was on a late autumn evening, when the chill of winter was just beginning to settle over the land. Pine Creek was one of those tiny, nearly forgotten villages nestled deep in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else, where the church bell tolled with a hollow sound, and where stories were told around fireplaces that burned bright against the coming cold. I had come to Pine Creek not by accident, but by inheritance. My great-uncle, a man I barely knew, had passed away and left me his small cabin on the outskirts of the village. The cabin was old, made of rough pine logs, darkened by decades of rain and sun. The keys to the cabin arrived by mail, accompanied by a short note. "Welcome to Pine Creek. Be careful whom you trust. They watch." At first, I thought it was some old family joke, something cryptic and meaningless. But from the moment I arrived, a feeling of unease settled over me like a cold fog. The village itself was quiet that evening. The narrow streets were empty, except for the occasional rustle of fallen leaves skittering across the cracked pavement. The lampposts flickered weakly, as if their light was struggling against some unseen darkness. Most windows in the houses were shuttered, casting a lifeless gloom over the place. I parked the car near the small general store, the only building with a dim light on. The store was locked, but the light inside revealed shadows moving behind the glass. I knocked, but no one answered. Only the wind responded, carrying the faint sound of whispered voices. I decided to head to the cabin, hoping to settle in before nightfall. The path to the cabin twisted through towering pines, their branches clawing at the sky. As I walked, the last rays of the sun vanished, and the forest seemed to close in around me. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of my boots on dead leaves and the distant call of an owl. Reaching the cabin, I found it even more dilapidated than I had imagined. The porch sagged, the windows were grimy, and the door creaked as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with dust and something else I couldn't name. Faint scratches marred the wooden floor, and the fireplace was filled with cold ashes. I lit a lantern and began unpacking. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, and the house seemed to groan as if settling into the earth. Hours passed, and the night deepened. I tried to shake off the growing unease, convincing myself that the silence was normal for a village like Pine Creek. But then I heard it, a soft tapping at the window. I froze, staring at the glass. Nothing was there. The tapping came again, slow, deliberate. 3 taps, then a pause, then 3 more. Remembering the note from my uncle, "They watch." A cold shiver ran down my spine. I drew the curtains and locked the windows, but the tapping didn't stop. Now it seemed to come from the door. I crept to the front door, heart hammering. The tapping was faint, almost hesitant, as if testing me. I looked through the peephole. Outside, the night was thick and black. No sign of anyone. I backed away, but the sound was not alone anymore. Now whispers floated through the cracks under the door, words I couldn't understand, but that sent a deep unease through me. Suddenly, the lantern flickered and went out. Plunged into darkness, I fumbled for my phone, only to find no signal and the battery nearly dead. Then, through the silence, a slow, dragging sound began somewhere outside, like feet moving over gravel, heavy, uneven, deliberate. I forced myself to light the lantern again, the flame trembling. Peering through the window, I caught sight of a figure standing at the edge of the trees. It was tall and thin, wrapped in a dark cloak that blended with the night. Its face was hidden, but the eyes, 2 pale dots reflecting the lantern's light, stared straight at me. I wanted to scream, to run, but my feet were rooted. The figure lifted a hand slowly and pointed toward the village. A faint wind seemed to carry a voice on it, a single word: "Join." The tapping returned, louder now, coming from every window and door. I realized then I wasn't alone. Pine Creek was alive, not with people, but with watchers. Guardians of some secret, trapped souls who waited for the night to call them out. I grabbed my jacket and fled into the woods, branches slapping my face and arms. Behind me, the village lights flickered, then died. I ran until dawn, never once daring to look back. I never returned to Pine Creek, but sometimes on dark autumn nights, I hear the tapping again, slow, patient, relentless, reminding me that some places are better left alone.